Imagine sitting peacefully in a park you visited for decades, enjoying the quiet morning. Then, out of nowhere, a young officer approaches, demanding to know if you belong there. How would you feel if your simple routine turned into an interrogation based on nothing but your appearance? What happens next will leave everyone speechless. This is a story of bias, justice, and a shocking revelation that no one saw coming. The sun was just beginning to rise over Trenton, Tennessee, casting golden light through the towering oak trees of Grant Park. It was a kind of peaceful morning that made you pause and take it all in, a rare moment of stillness in a fast-moving world. Sitting on a worn wooden bench near the park's center was Raymond Brooks, an elderly man whose weathered hands held a steaming cup of coffee. His salt and pepper hair, neatly trimmed, hinted at his military past, and though age had slowed him, his posture remained proud. For nearly 30 years, this had been his routine: coffee, a newspaper, and the quiet hum of the city waking up around him. Joggers waved, dog walkers nodded, and Raymond greeted them all with a warm smile. But today felt different. There was a tension in the air he couldn't quite place. Then he saw him, a young police officer, unfamiliar to Raymond, entered the park with a firm, deliberate stride. His uniform was crisp, his stance authoritative, and his eyes locked onto Raymond almost immediately. Raymond felt his pulse quicken. He wasn't doing anything wrong, never had, but there was something in the officer's gaze that made him uneasy. He had seen that look before. Officer David Clark, fresh from the academy and eager to prove himself, moved with the weight of authority that felt heavier than the moment required. His eyes scanned the park before settling on the older man sitting alone, boots crunching against the gravel. Clark approached with purpose. "Good morning," he said, though his tone felt more like a demand than a greeting. Raymond looked up from his newspaper, offering a polite smile. "Morning." Clark stopped a few feet away, hands resting on his belt. He didn't return the smile. "What are you doing here, sir?" The question was sharp, more accusation than curiosity. Raymond frowned, caught off guard. "Just having my coffee. Been coming here for years." Clark's expression hardened. "Do you live around here?" Raymond nodded, the warmth in his voice fading. "For more than 30 years. This is my neighborhood." Clark studied him, as if searching for something, some reason to validate his suspicion. Then his tone grew even firmer. "Do you have ID on you?" Raymond stiffened. In all his years coming to this park, no one had ever asked him for ID. He glanced at Clark's face, cold, unreadable. But then he noticed something else. The officer's fingers twitched near his holster. Raymond's voice was calm, but laced with disbelief. "ID for sitting on a bench." Clark's jaw tightened. "I need to verify that you belong in this neighborhood." That was it. Raymond's fingers clenched around his coffee cup as frustration bubbled to the surface. He had heard these words before too many times, and he knew exactly where this was going. Decades of being told where he could and couldn't go. Raymond thought those days were behind him. But here it was again, in 2024, in his own neighborhood, in a park he had helped preserve. He wasn't young anymore, not filled with the same fire. Now it was exhaustion more than anger. "Raymond sigh, officer," he said evenly. "I've been sitting on this bench longer than you've been alive. I don't think I need to prove anything." For a second, Clark looked caught off guard. Then his expression hardened. He stepped closer, his hand now resting openly on his holster. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some ID." Nearby, people started to slow their steps, watching, but no one stepped in. "Not yet." Raymond reached for his cane and slowly stood, the years weighing on his legs. He wasn't looking for a fight, but he wasn't about to be pushed around either. "I'm not causing trouble, officer," he said, meeting Clark's gaze. "But I'm not about to be treated like a criminal for sitting in a park." The air thickened with tension. Clark, young and eager to assert control, felt his authority slipping. Raymond, tired but unwavering, held his ground. Then, from behind a row of hedges, another figure emerged. Kelvin Williams, a retired teacher in his 60s, had been sitting under a tree nearby. He had come to the park for peace, but now he saw something that made his stomach drop. An officer, too close, too aggressive, hand hovering near his weapon. Kelvin had seen this before. He knew where it could go. With quiet determination, he stood and walked toward them. His presence was calm, but commanding, shaped by years of experience. Raymond noticed him first, a flicker of relief in his eyes. Clark, too fixated on asserting dominance, didn't see Kelvin until he spoke. "Is there a problem here, officer?" Kelvin's voice was steady, carrying the weight of someone who had stood up to authority before. Clark turned, clearly irritated. "This doesn't concern you, sir. Step back." Kelvin didn't move. Instead, he took another step closer to Raymond, his hands visible, giving Clark no excuse to escalate. "It's my concern now," he said. "I've been sitting over there, listening, and what I heard was an elderly man being harassed for sitting in a park." Clark's face flushed with anger. He was losing control, and he knew it. His grip on his holster tightened. "You need to watch your tone," he growled. "This is official business." Kelvin didn't flinch. "I'm watching, officer, and what I see is a man overstepping his authority." Raymond, quiet until now, finally spoke. "Kelvin, it's okay. I don't want any trouble." Kelvin looked at him, his expression softening. Then, back at Clark, "This isn't trouble, Ray. This is standing up for what's right." Clark took another step forward, inches from Kelvin, now his frustration boiling over. "You want trouble," he hissed, "because I can make this very difficult for you both." Just as the situation teetered on the edge of chaos, a sharp voice rang out. "That's enough." The words cut through the tension like a whip. All three men turned to see Captain James Matthews striding toward them, a senior officer in his late 40s. Matthews commanded respect the moment he entered a room or, in this case, a park. He had seen the confrontation from the street and hurried over. "Clark," Matthews barked. "Stand down." Clark stiffened. "Captain, I said stand down." Clark's face paled. He immediately took a step back, his hand falling away from his holster. Matthews turned to Raymond and Kelvin, his tone shifting. "Gentlemen, is everything all right?" Kelvin, still keeping an eye on Clark, gave a slow nod. "We are now. But your officer here seemed a little overzealous." Matthews' gaze snapped to Clark. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Clark hesitated. "I was just checking if he belonged here, sir. We had complaints." Matthews cut him off. "Complaints about an elderly man sitting in a park?" Clark stammered, floundering. "I didn't know who he was." "You didn't need to," Matthews said, voice sharp. "This is a public park. You don't harass people for sitting in public spaces." Raymond finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "I've been coming here for 30 years, Captain. Never had a problem until today." Matthews' jaw tightened. "And you shouldn't have had one today." He turned back to Clark, his tone final. "Go back to the station. I'll deal with you later." Clark hesitated, then nodded stiffly. His boots scraped against the gravel as he walked away, leaving behind an uneasy silence. Matthews exhaled, running a hand over his close-cropped hair. "I apologize," he said quietly. "That wasn't acceptable. It won't happen again." Raymond studied him. "I appreciate that, Captain, but this isn't the first time, and I doubt it'll be the last." Matthews sighed, the weight of responsibility pressing on him. "I know we're trying to change things." Kelvin, arms crossed, shook his head. "Trying isn't enough. It takes action." Matthews nodded. "You're right, and I promise you, things will change." Raymond, gripping his cane, gazed out over the park. "I hope so," he murmured. "I really hope so." The stillness returned, but the weight of the morning lingered. Raymond Matthews said, using his first name now. I know this doesn't fix what happened, but I want you to know we're not all like Clark. He's new, still learning. Raymond gave a quiet, bitter chuckle. You think training is going to change what's in his heart? Matthews had heard that question before. The truth was he didn't know, but it was all he had to offer. It's a start, he said finally, though even he didn't sound convinced. Raymond sighed, the years heavy on his shoulders. I've seen starts before, Captain. I haven't seen a finish. Kelvin placed a steady hand on Raymond's shoulder. I'm holding you to that, Captain, he said, because this can't keep happening. Matthews met his gaze, and for the first time, Kelvin saw something past the badge determination. You have my word, Matthews said. We need real change. I'll make sure of it. Raymond, exhausted from the morning's events, motioned toward his bench. I think I'm going to sit for a minute. Raymond lowered himself onto the bench, his cane tapping lightly against the pavement. He took a deep breath, feeling the strain of the confrontation settle in his chest. Kelvin stayed close, glancing at the captain one last time before sitting down beside Raymond. Captain Matthews lingered for a moment, as if searching for the right words, but in the end he simply gave a respectful nod and walked away. As his footsteps faded into the distance, the park seemed to settle again, though the peace it once held was not yet restored. For a long while, neither man spoke. The distant sounds of joggers and birds filled the air, but between them silence hung heavy. Raymond stared down at his hands, the deep lines on his skin like a map of his years. This park had always been his escape, a place of quiet, but now it felt different, tainted. I'm getting too old for this, Raymond muttered, his voice low and worn. Kelvin, still gazing out at the park, turned to his friend. Ray, you're not too old, he said softly. You're just tired. And you've got every right to be. Raymond let out a deep breath, nodding slowly. Maybe you're right, but it doesn't make it any easier. For years, he had fought battles that no one else seemed to notice. He had lived through segregation, marched for civil rights, seen progress that younger generations took for granted. And yet, even now, in his 70s, he was still here, still fighting the same fight. You know, Raymond said, his eyes distant. When I was young, I thought if we pushed hard enough, if we just kept going, things would change. That the next generation wouldn't have to deal with this. Kelvin leaned back, listening quietly. He had heard Raymond's stories before, the marches, the protests, the struggles. He had always admired the man's resilience. And things have changed, Raymond admitted. I've seen it, but days like this, they make me wonder. They make me wonder if we've really come as far as we think. Kelvin didn't respond right away. He let Raymond's words settle. He knew the truth of them. The progress they had fought for was real, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. Maybe we haven't, Kelvin said finally. But that doesn't mean we give up. I don't think you've ever been the type to give up, Ray. Raymond gave a tired smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. No, I guess not. But it gets harder, Kelvin. Every year it gets harder. Kelvin leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I know it does, but that's why we keep going. That's why we don't stop, because we can't afford to. The two men sat in silence, letting the morning sun warm their faces. Raymond looked up at the trees, watching the branches sway gently in the breeze. For a moment, just a moment, the park felt peaceful again, like it had before Officer Clark arrived. He wished it could always feel that way. Just as Raymond was about to speak, Kelvin's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glancing at the screen before exhaling a low sigh. Looks like this is getting around, he muttered, holding up his phone for Raymond to see. On the screen was a local news alert. Officer confronts elderly man in park. Community outrage grows. Raymond squinted at the screen, a frown tugging at the corners of his mouth. Didn't take long, did it? Kelvin shook his head, slipping the phone back into his pocket. Nothing stays quiet these days. It's probably already trending. Raymond leaned back on the bench, closing his eyes for a moment. So what now? Kelvin didn't have an answer. He didn't know if this would blow over or if it would become the spark for something bigger. But he did know one thing: they weren't going to let it slide. We keep going, Kelvin said, his voice steady. We speak up. We make sure this doesn't get swept under the rug. Raymond opened his eyes and gave a small nod. His voice was quiet but firm. All right. By the afternoon, the quiet confrontation in the park had grown into something much larger. Word spread fast. What started as whispers became phone calls, then online posts, then news reports. Soon, a small crowd gathered at Grant Park. At first, Raymond stayed on the outskirts, watching from a distance. People arrived in groups, some carrying signs, others just standing and talking. It felt surreal. This wasn't what he had wanted. He had come to the park that morning, like any other day, hoping for a little peace and quiet. Now his routine had been shattered in a way he never expected. But as he watched, something stirred inside him. This wasn't just about him. It was about something bigger. And even though he was tired, so tired he knew he couldn't walk away. Kelvin stood beside him, silent for a while, then nudged Raymond gently. Looks like people are ready to speak up. Raymond nodded, scanning the growing crowd. Yeah, he murmured. Guess they are. The crowd had swelled to nearly 50 people now. Some were familiar faces, neighbors, friends. Others were strangers, young, old, different backgrounds, different races. But they had all come together, united by something larger than any one of them. Someone from the crowd waved, calling out to him. Raymond hesitated. Then he realized they were calling for him to come forward. He glanced at Kelvin, who gave him a small, encouraging nod. They want to hear from you, Ray, Kelvin said gently. They need to hear from you. Raymond hesitated for a moment longer, but then he straightened up, his old military posture returning. Slowly, he began to walk toward the crowd, his cane tapping against the pavement with each step. As he approached, conversations quieted. All eyes turned to him. He stood before them, feeling the weight of their gaze. For a moment, he wasn't sure what to say. He had given speeches before. He had led marches, rallies. But this felt different. This felt personal. Raymond took a deep breath, and then he began to speak. I didn't come here today looking for a fight, he said, his voice steady. I came here for peace, just like I do every morning. He paused, scanning the faces before him. But sometimes peace isn't enough. The rally was over, but the movement had just begun. In the days that followed, Raymond found himself in meetings he never expected to attend: city halls, community centers, interviews with local journalists. He was no activist, not anymore, but the role had found him once again. Kelvin stood by his side through it all, helping organize petitions, drafting letters, and pushing for a meeting with the mayor. The city couldn't ignore them now, not with the story making headlines, not with the pressure mounting. Still, Raymond wondered if it would be enough. One evening, after a long day of planning, he and Kelvin sat on his porch, watching the streetlights flicker on. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of quiet Raymond had always loved. You think this will actually change anything? Raymond asked, his voice weary but hopeful. Kelvin leaned back, considering the question. I think change is slow, but I also think we just made it a little faster. Raymond exhaled, nodding. Maybe that was all they could do, push the needle forward. Even just a little. A few days later, the city announced mandatory de-escalation training for all officers. It wasn't a revolution, but it was something, a start. When Raymond returned to the park that morning, things felt different. People greeted him with nods, smiles, quiet words of thanks. Even Officer Clark, standing at a distance, gave a small, Uncertain not. Raymond sat on his usual bench, looking out at the trees, the joggers, the children playing. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a stranger in his own home. He belonged, and this time everyone knew it. The auditorium buzzed with energy as the forum began. City council members made their opening remarks, promising commitment to change. But the crowd wasn't there for promises, they wanted action. Kelvin spoke first, laying out the community's demands: real policy changes, transparency, and accountability. Then Raymond took the microphone. "This isn't about words," he said, his voice steady. "It's about what comes next." A murmur of agreement spread through the crowd. People stepped forward, sharing personal stories of discrimination and neglect. Anita, standing near the back, hesitated before raising her hand. "When will we see real results?" she asked, her voice firm despite her nerves. Captain Matthews met her gaze. "We're already making changes," he said, "but I know words aren't enough. We'll prove it through action." The night ended with a tense but hopeful resolve. The community had made itself heard louder than ever before, and this time they wouldn't be ignored. The forum was just the beginning, and the following weeks the Civilian Oversight Board began its work, and it quickly became clear this was not just for show. People asked tough questions, demanded transparency, reviewed reports, and pushed for real action. Raymond hadn't expected to be so involved, but every time Kelvin or one of the organizers called, he couldn't say no. "You're the heart of this movement," Kelvin had told him one afternoon, and deep down, Raymond knew he was right. One day, as he sat on his usual bench in Grant Park, watching the world go by, Anita appeared again, her green hoodie blending into the background. She smiled shyly as she took a seat beside him. "You're becoming a regular," Raymond teased. Anita chuckled. "Yeah, I guess I am." They sat in silence for a while, the park buzzing with life around them. Then Anita spoke, her voice steady. "I think I'm ready." Raymond turned to her, curious. "Ready for what?" "To speak up," she said. "To really be a part of this. I've been on the sidelines too long." Raymond smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "You'll do just fine," he said. "I know it." As the sun set over Grant Park, casting a golden glow over the trees, Raymond felt something shift. The road ahead was still long, still filled with challenges, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was walking it alone, and for now, that was enough.